This is Disc 3 of 3 Seconds by Dr. Les Parrott. Chapter 4. It takes 3 seconds to own your piece of the pie. The price of greatness is responsibility. Sir Winston Churchill.
Spaghetti with meat sauce, Caesar salad, garlic bread, and 2 Diet Cokes. To go. That was our order at a local restaurant in Seattle not too long ago. At 8:30 on a Thursday night, after a long day of hard work, Leslie and I were weary and hungry. All we wanted to do was go home, put our feet up, put our minds in neutral while eating some comfort food. The server at the Italian restaurant took our order as we stood at the hostess desk in the jam-packed lobby. "Don't you need a pen?" I asked him as we pointed to the items we wanted on the menu. "Nope, I got it." He assured us it wouldn't take long and rushed back to the kitchen with our order. Sure enough, just 10 minutes later, our server arrived in the lobby with 2 large bags of piping hot takeout. We scooped them up and were on our way. When we arrived home and fired up our TiVo, however, we realized the waiter had given us the wrong food. Instead of meat sauce, our spaghetti was covered in clam sauce. The Caesar salad was there, but the bread was a simple baguette, not their famous garlic bread. And we had a sneaking suspicion our Cokes weren't diet either. It was too late to drive across town to exchange the food, so I phoned the restaurant to let them know what happened. "Hi, I don't know if you remember me, but just a few minutes ago my wife and I picked up some food to go. Anyway, we're home now and we realize that it's not the right order." "You ordered it from us?" they asked. "Yes." "Carlisle's on 45th Street?" she pressed, as if receiving the wrong order from them was an impossibility. "Yes." I was just a little puzzled at this line of questioning. "I was there less than a half hour ago." "Okay," she said, "so what's the problem?" "Well, we ordered spaghetti with meat sauce, and it's clam sauce." "Well, you might enjoy the clam sauce," she said. "It's very popular." "Well, that may be, but it's not what I ordered, and I'm allergic to shellfish." "Let me see if I can find your ticket." "Why does it matter? I know what I ordered, and I know we got the wrong food." "Do you know who took your order? I can ask him about it." What good is that going to do?" With the phone muffled by her hand, I heard her say, "Tony, did you mess up the order for the couple getting takeout? They got clam instead of marinara." "Meat sauce," I shouted into the phone as my wife Leslie raised her eyebrows from across the room. "You don't have to raise your voice, sir," the hostess said. "I can hear you just fine." "We ordered meat sauce, not marinara or clam sauce," I said in a controlled tone. "So what would you like me to do, sir?" she said in an exasperated tone. "Well, I guess I'd just like an apology." And honestly, at that point, that's really all I did want. Sure, I would have enjoyed getting the food I ordered, but now an admission of culpability from this restaurant seemed like the best I could expect. Strange, isn't it? How could an apology become so important for such a minor offense? Why would the words "I'm sorry" from a total stranger, a restaurant hostess, seem so soothing? I'm guessing you already know the answer. I wanted her, on behalf of the restaurant, to accept responsibility for the problem. You've been there, haven't you? Maybe it wasn't a restaurant, but a mechanic's garage, a department store, a doctor's office. All of us have encountered workers who were bent on not bending. They began defending when we just wanted them to acknowledge the problem. A simple "I'm sorry" in that kind of situation can often diffuse the conflict. "If you don't accept responsibility for your own actions," said Holly Liesel, "you are forever chained to a position of defense." That is so true. And yet so many people hold on to their first impulse, to avoid blame at all costs. But here again, 3 seconds can make a world of difference. When we pause and resist the blame game, others relax. Why? Because they stop passing the buck and own our part of the problem. Suddenly we are all on the same team and start working together for a solution. "I'm sorry" is often the first step toward making things right. It's also essential to moving from whatever to whatever it takes. Why we don't like to take ownership. Have you ever noticed how so many people only admit wrongdoing when they're forced to? Read any newspaper on almost any day and you'll see a version of that phrase. You'll read, for example, union officials were forced to admit that they wrongly fired state government workers for refusing to pay dues. The union didn't freely admit it, they were forced to do so. Or we will hear that an official begrudgingly apologized for wrongdoing. A self-motivated confession of failure is rare. Nobody likes to admit their mistakes, and we typically don't do it unless we're nailed to the wall. We prefer instead to let someone else take ownership for a problem because that gets us off the hook. Our best tool for doing just that is blame. We can blame the problem on something or someone rather than admitting that we had anything to do with the problem ourselves. It's human nature. From the very beginning, as children, we blame our siblings, he made me do it, or our pets, my dog ate the homework. But even after we mature, laying blame is a tough habit to kick. Some time ago, I completely missed an appointment for a live interview on a local radio station. It was on my calendar. It had been publicized for days, but the afternoon of the interview, Leslie invited me to run a few errands with her, and I agreed, completely forgetting that I was supposed to be in the studio. It wasn't until 9 o'clock that evening that I realized my mistake. I was mortified, and I blamed Leslie. I never miss an appointment. Why didn't you remind me? I asked her. I'm responsible for keeping track of my own schedule, my own calendar, but that didn't stop me from saying I never would have missed the interview if you hadn't asked me to go on those crazy errands. My talk was completely irrational, and I cringed just thinking about it. But the blame game seems to be hardwired in me and everyone else. Ever since Adam blamed Eve and Eve blamed the serpent, we humans have been passing the buck with excuses and blame. We do it to shirk responsibility and save our own necks, but it seldom works. Who's responsible for this? If there is one thing I learned in 6 years of graduate school training to be a psychologist, and in my 2 decades of counseling since, it's that people in couples counseling usually believe their problems lie mainly within the other person. Like gunslingers from the Old West, they draw their dueling fingers and point to each other's flaws and foibles. They say things like, if it weren't for your anger, we might have a real marriage. Or, if you didn't lie about so many things, maybe I could trust you. Or even, if you were ever interested in having a conversation, I might be interested in having sex. Every competent counselor knows that no matter what the problem in a marriage, the system that sustains it is found in both people. Why? Because each person is responsible to some degree for their circumstances. Like a mobile hanging from the ceiling, the equilibrium of the marriage is created and maintained by both partners. A change in one piece of the mobile impacts the equilibrium of the entire structure. Likewise, every marriage maintains balance as the two people counter one another by shifting their positions, their attitudes, and their behaviors. The point is that in a long-term relationship, complete responsibility for problems rarely rests entirely on the shoulders of one person. And that is why, before a single step is taken, before a move is made, each person needs to take responsibility. A reversal of bad fortune occurs in marriage when spouses own up and realize that it is not who's wrong, but what's wrong that counts. I know that my own marriage to Leslie had its best day when I took responsibility for my part of the relationship, and she did the same thing. It's when we stopped finding fault. That's when we quit looking to lay blame. On that day, we began to find freedom from all the nitpicky push and pull and trying to put the responsibility for any problem on each other. Owning up on behalf of someone else. This same principle of owning up and taking responsibility for one's circumstances applies to every aspect of our lives. If you work in customer service or sales, taking responsibility for any problem is part of the job description, and many times you have to shoulder the blame, not because you personally did anything wrong, but on behalf of the company. The best way to do this is to focus not on who's wrong, but on what's wrong. A customer was having some difficulty getting a refund check, a manager for a large retail store told me. She came to me because she said our operations manager was rude to her. I'm sure that was just a misunderstanding, but I apologized, helped her get the check, and sent her on her way. That's it. The manager didn't have to quiz the customer or another employee. She apologized for the customer's experience and made it right. So how do you learn to take responsibility when you don't feel responsible or when you know you did nothing wrong? I love this question. It gets to the heart of the issue. So many people in customer service react the wrong way. They try to pick apart the problem to prove that it's not really a problem. Or if they acknowledge the problem, they look for ways to show it was not their fault. For all of us on the receiving end of this kind of customer service, the result is frustration and anger. Sidestepping responsibility in any problem often only diverts attention from the problem itself and focuses on the people involved. Focusing on who rather than what just wastes time and frustrates the customer. Ever been there? Consider an experience I had at a mid-level hotel in Denver some time ago. Due to a canceled flight, I had an extended layover, so I checked in around 3 o'clock in the morning. I consoled myself with the hope of sleeping late, and as a gold member of this hotel's frequent guest club, I asked for a room that would be especially quiet at the end of the hall, away from elevators, ice machines, and housekeeping closets. The clerk obliged and set up a 10 a.m. wake-up call. Once in my room, I shut the shades tight, hung out the Do Not Disturb sign, and hit the hay. I was asleep almost the moment my head hit the pillow, but just a few hours later, my slumber was abruptly cut short. The digital clock next to the bed said 7-something when I heard the most deafening sound I'd ever heard in a hotel, and it didn't stop. Every few seconds, it would fill the room with what sounded like thunder. Groggy, I got out of bed and peered through the drapes, expecting to see a massive storm, but the sun was rising peacefully. I immediately pressed the express service button on my room's phone to ask about the noise. As puzzled as I was, the operator assured me she'd look into it and call me back. She did. It turns out that they were renovating the room above me and literally using jackhammers. So much for sleeping in. I showered, packed my suitcase, and headed to the front desk to talk with someone about the 4 hours of sleep I had gotten in their hotel. With my frequent guest card in hand, I leaned upon the granite countertop and told Molly, that was the name on her brass name tag, my story. After hearing my piece, here is the first sentence that came out of Molly's mouth. "That's strange. I wonder who was working the desk last night." I kept silent as she fumbled with some papers. She continued in a pleasant voice. "Was it a man or a woman?" I felt my heart quicken and my muscles tense. "You've got to be kidding me," I said to myself. She's committing the cardinal sin of customer service by trying to place blame instead of solving the problem. This kind of self-talk helps me keep my cool. What I said out loud was this: "Let me save us both some time, Molly. Maybe I can talk with your manager." "Sure," Molly said as she disappeared into the back room for a minute or two and returned. "Steve will be with you after he gets off the phone, but I can get you a certificate for our breakfast buffet if you'd like." "That's okay. I'll wait for Steve." By the way, I should note that Molly was completely professional and courteous, the very qualities I'm sure that were emphasized in her training. What she didn't learn was how to own whatever the customer had a problem with. Fortunately, Steve had this lesson nailed. He came out from his office and back, signaled to me to wait, and came around to my side of the counter to talk to me. He greeted me with a handshake and said, "Dr. Parrott, I've just learned what happened to you this morning, and I want you to know that I am deeply sorry. There's no excuse for it, and I want you to know that I'll do whatever I can to make it up to you." "Attaboy, Steve," I said to myself. I hope Molly is watching. It's just what she needs to witness in order to learn this principle. Steve was apologetic, didn't make excuses, and was willing to correct the mistake, even though he personally didn't make it. Steve, in other words, was willing to do whatever it takes. This principle doesn't just apply to customer service situations. In a conflict with a friend, the best way to disarm them and get to the heart of the matter is to demonstrate that you're not trying to deflect blame. In office politics, sometimes you have to swallow your pride and acknowledge your part in the conflict, no matter how small. Now, I don't mean that you should own the part that's not yours. That doesn't get you and the other person any closer to solving the problem. On the old Bob Newhart show, the one from the 1970s that cast Bob as a psychologist in Chicago, one regular character carried meekness to a fault. He was a door-to-door salesman who wouldn't knock on people's doors because he was afraid it might disturb them. So his sales strategy was to wait on the doorstep, hoping they'd happen to open the door. This obviously wasn't very successful, so he became a client of Bob's. One day, this fretful character bustled into Bob's office, muttering, "I'm sorry I'm late." "You're not late," said Bob. "Well, then I'm sorry I'm early," he replied. "You're not early, either," Bob told him. "I'm sorry," he sighed. Obviously, this guy had a problem, right? It's doubtful that you take apologizing to this extreme, but I've encountered enough trigger-happy apologizers to at least warn you against doing something similar. The sorry state of apologizing. Somebody recently said to me, "We've gotten to the point where everybody's got a right and nobody's got a responsibility." Isn't that true? Each of us is quick to lay claim to what we believe we're entitled to, but we're amazingly slow to take ownership of a situation that's not going well. And taking ownership should go hand in hand with apologizing. Sadly, these days, apologizing without admitting wrongdoing has become an art form. Experts tell us that the word sorry can be defined in several ways: as the defense of an idea, a plea for a pardon, or as an expression of regret. This last one seems to be harder and harder to come by. A recent CNN report by Jeff Greenfield focused on politicians and what inspires their acts of contrition. Not surprisingly, the conclusion was that much of the time a politician is forced to apologize for an action or inaction, and they apologize not to admit wrong and express remorse, but simply to save a political career. It's amazing how a politician's staff of writers can craft an apology that sidesteps as much wrongdoing as possible. Of course, it's not always politicians that have to make public apologies. Consider Mark Millar, the founder of Chicago's Lakeshore Marathon, a small race held every year in May. To most of us, a marathon seems infinitely long, but there is an end, and the race is always 26.2 miles. But not in 2005. On that day, the 529 runners who finished actually ran 27.2 miles, and not intentionally. They found out afterward that Millar and his team had miscalculated where the finish line should have been. Many of the runners had come from out of town and with the express purpose of using the results to qualify for the prestigious Boston Marathon. That extra mile made the difference between qualifying and not qualifying for many of them. Even during the race, runners experienced a disorganized mess. Missing mile markers and poor directions actually got some runners lost. One woman who had been leading in the beginning got completely turned around. "I was so confused," she said, "I wanted to cry." Eventually, Mark Millar issued an apology, on a website. Quote, "Last-minute changes caused us to miscalculate and we foolishly added an extra mile. How terrible." End of quote. I'm sure that wouldn't have made me feel any better if I was one of the runners who got lost and misqualifying or didn't finish because of their foolish miscalculations. Whether public or private, an apology can be more self-serving than self-giving by wording it in such a way as to avoid true responsibility. Ever had someone say this to you? "If you were hurt, I am sorry." Or how about this? "I'm sorry you feel that way, but..." It's really no apology at all, is it? This kind of pseudo or false apology is designed to minimize the person's culpability instead of expressing remorse. That's why these days no words are easier to distrust than "I'm sorry." And that's exactly why they are so critically important to understand in the process of taking ownership. These words, more than any others, when expressed from a genuine heart, are the clearest signal we have for showing that we are taking ownership and that we are about to make things right. How to take ownership. As you might guess, knowing how to make a solid apology is a big part of this. But there are 3 other ingredients that are worth mentioning first. Number 1, put your money where your mouth is. The person who is willing to do whatever it takes gives more than mere lip service to the idea of taking ownership. As the saying goes, they put up or shut up. I saw a striking example of this on the street in New York City. The 3M company had set up a display to demonstrate the effectiveness of their shatterproof glass. There, anchored to the sidewalk without an armed guard in sight, was a glass case containing thousands of clearly visible $100 bills, stacked up to 4 feet high. They must have represented millions of dollars. Enough said, right? 3M literally put their money on the line to show they were serious. But this quality of demonstrating one's commitment extends far beyond money. Consider Dr. Evan O'Neill Kane, chief surgeon of Kane Summit Hospital in New York City. He had practiced his specialty for 37 years. He was convinced that general anesthesia was too risky for many operations. His theory was that general anesthesia should and could be replaced with well-administered local anesthesia. He was anxious to prove this as soon as he could find a person willing to go under the knife while conscious. It seemed that all those he talked to were afraid their bodies would regain sensation during the surgery and feel pain. Finally, he found a subject on whom he could perform an appendectomy. Kane had performed appendectomies thousands of times, so he was confident in his ability. On the day of the surgery, the patient was prepped and brought to the operating room. After the local anesthesia took effect, Kane followed his standard procedure. Cutting across the right side of the abdomen, he went in. He tied off the blood vessels, found the appendix, excised it, and sutured the incision. Remarkably, the patient felt little discomfort. In fact, he was up and walking the next afternoon, which was remarkable for 1921 when people who had appendectomies were typically confined to a hospital bed for a week or more. It was a milestone in the world of medicine. It was also a display of courage because the patient and the doctor were one and the same. To demonstrate his theory, Dr. Kane had operated on himself. Okay, I know this is over the top. Talk about doing whatever it takes. Thankfully, few of us will ever be expected to take ownership in such a dramatic fashion. But whenever we are willing to risk our money, our business, or even our well-being to demonstrate our commitment, we are taking full ownership. Whenever you put a stake in the ground and you own an idea, a cause, or even a mistake, you are saying that the buck stops with you. You stand behind your actions. You're putting your money where your mouth is, not just giving lip service. Here's another way to say it. People paying lip service usually do so because they have no intention of acting on what they say. This is the very opposite of taking ownership. Number 2, embrace your fears and failures. Far too often, I've seen someone give up on a whatever-it-takes attitude because they fully committed to an idea or effort and then failed. Has this ever happened to you? Well, you're not alone. Everyone who ends up accomplishing something of note also failed miserably along the way. What keeps them going is their capacity to expect and embrace their fears and failures. They don't blame the system, their family, their boss, or anything else for their lack of success. Of course, it helps if you have a leader who lets you own your failure without destroying you for it. When Thomas Edison and his staff were developing the incandescent light bulb, it took hundreds of hours to make just a single bulb. One day, after finishing one, he handed it to a young errand boy and asked him to take it upstairs to a testing room. As the boy turned and started up the stairs, he stumbled and fell, and the bulb shattered onto the steps. Horrified, the boy apologized profusely and expected a rebuke, but instead of rebuking the youth, Edison reassured him. Then he simply turned to his staff and told them to start working on another bulb. Several days later, when it was completed, Edison demonstrated the reality of his forgiveness in the most powerful way possible. He walked over to the same boy, handed him the bulb, and said, "Please take this up to the testing room." Imagine how that boy must have felt. He knew that he hadn't earned Edison's trust with this responsibility. Yet here it was, being offered to him again as though nothing had ever happened. Nothing could have restored this boy to the team more clearly, more quickly, or more fully. And by the way, you can bet this boy was fearful as he headed up those stairs. Taking ownership often presents new fears. When you own your dream, for example, you can no longer blame others for your failure to achieve it. This must be what Nelson Mandela meant when he said, "Our greatest fear is not that we will discover that we are inadequate, but that we will discover that we are powerful beyond measure." Number 3, apologize when necessary. I have a friend who says humble pie is a pastry that's never tasty. Goofy, I know, but this little quip conveys a profound truth, namely that taking ownership is never easy, and it's downright impossible if you have a chip on your shoulder. For example, imagine if the errand boy in Edison's testing workshop had taken on an arrogant attitude and blamed his accident on the slippery steps. Do you think he would have received that second chance? I doubt it. The price of greatness is responsibility, said the great statesman Winston Churchill. To accept responsibility, you've got to learn to apologize. And this takes humility. It involves a respectful and earnest gesture of remorse. Let's take a good look at the 3 time-tested elements of a good apology. First, you've got to understand what's wrong. This sounds simple, but it's often overlooked. Most of us think an apology means rushing to say those 2 little words, "I'm sorry." And if we offer it up too soon, it's often for the wrong thing. If we feel obligated to apologize when we don't think we did anything wrong, then we often do so resentfully. Either way isn't sincere. First, we've got to understand the real problem. Why? Because we make assumptions. We read between the lines. We jump to conclusions. I showed up at the house of a friend and rang the doorbell. He opened the door and said, "Les, where are the chairs?" "Ooh, I was supposed to bring some chairs." I responded, "Oh, I forgot." He glared at me and barked, "That figures." I thought, that figures? He thinks I'm no good. He thinks I can't follow through. Then I thought, who does he think he is? What a creep. At that point, I had 2 options. I could either try to see the best in what he was saying, although that was pretty tough, and just forget it, or I could ask him what he meant, even though it seemed obvious to me. A couple of days later, I saw him and brought it up. "You know the other day when I was at your house and forgot to bring the chairs and you said, 'That figures'?" He interrupted me. "I shouldn't have said that." "Well, I was wondering what you meant." Well, that entire day in every meeting I went to, someone had forgotten something. The first thing that came to mind was that it just figured. So he wasn't saying, "Parrott, you're a jerk." He was saying, "My day's been terrible." Like I said, we all make assumptions. We mind read. That's why the first important element in any apology is making sure you accurately understand what's wrong. Second, you've got to admit what's wrong. This can be the toughest element for most of us. Just like the waiter at a restaurant who won't admit to taking an order incorrectly, or the husband who doesn't want to admit that he's forgotten to pick up the milk at the store, we all typically find it tough to admit to what's wrong even after we understand it. One of my favorite examples of this is from the classic Seinfeld television series. Jerry walks into a dry cleaner's shop with a shirt that has obviously been shrunken. The dry cleaner says, "May I help you?" Jerry says, "Yeah, I picked up this shirt here yesterday. It's completely shrunk. There's absolutely no way I can wear it." "When did you bring it in?" "What's the difference? Look at it. You see the size of this shirt?" "You got a receipt?" "I can't find the receipt." "You should get the receipt." "Look, forget about the receipt, all right? Even if I had the receipt, look at it. It's a hand puppet. What am I going to do with this shirt?" "Yes, but how do I know we did the shirt?" "What do you think, this is a little scam I have? I take this tiny shirt all over the city, conning dry cleaners out of money?" "In fact, forget the money. I don't even want the money. Just once I would like to hear a dry cleaner admit that something was their fault. That's what I want. I want an admission of guilt." The dry cleaner responds by saying, "Maybe you asked for it to be washed." "No, dry cleaned." "Let me explain to you something, okay? With certain types of fabrics, different chemicals can react, causing..." Jerry interrupts. "You shrunk it. You know you shrunk it. Just tell me that you shrunk it." The dry cleaner finally confesses, "I shrunk it." Phew, there it is, an admission of what went wrong, finally. Don't make anyone drag an admission of what's wrong out of you. Own it, admit it, and get ready for the third element of an apology. Finally, you've got to rectify what's wrong. Once you understand what's wrong, and you've admitted it, your third challenge is to make it better. Even large corporations are learning this lesson. When MasterCare Auto Service Centers, $1 billion a year chain owned by Bridgestone Firestone, started linking employee pay to customer retention, their customers noticed. And not in a good way. Surveys of 4,000 car owners in Columbus, Ohio and Memphis, Tennessee showed that people despise MasterCare's hard sell. Senior Vice President John Rooney said, "We purported to be the premium provider of auto service in the U.S., but we failed. We found we were rude, that mechanics left grease in car seats, all sorts of things. By the way, did you notice this little word? A senior official at a major company said they failed. That's a rarity. But that's exactly what apologizing entails. And after admitting failure, you need to do something to correct it. So what did MasterCare do after owning their mistake? Well, most customers told the company that honest, courteous service on a repair was twice as important as price. So MasterCare created a new employee incentive program. Each month, Rooney has an outside firm poll 50 customers from each store, asking them whether they received good service and plan to return to MasterCare. Employees who keep customers loyal get bonuses equaling about 10% of their salaries. Even the bonuses for the mechanics depend on the survey scores, because, says Rooney, it's not just the smoothness of the salesman that is important, it's also the quality of the work. Here's the payoff. MasterCare centers using the new incentive system have raised customer retention 25% and lowered employee turnover some 40%. Corporations like MasterCare can do surveys and provide statistics proving that rectifying the problem is the way to go. But the same holds true for individuals. No one feels like they've received a true apology if the wrong is not righted. It takes 3 seconds to take ownership. As a high school student in Kansas City, Missouri, I had to write a paper on Harry Truman, the 33rd President of the United States. As part of my research, I secured a student pass for his presidential library in nearby Independence, Missouri. One of my memories of this experience is a tour of his replicated Oval Office. After scanning the room, I was captivated by the sign that must have been the focus of many conversations with visitors to his White House office in the 1950s. The 4 words printed in gold on the sign caught my eye, as they must have caught the eye of Truman's friend Fred Canfield when he saw a similar sign on the warden's desk of a reformatory in the early 1940s. Canfield asked the warden if one could be made for Truman, and the glass sign mounted on a walnut base was mailed to the president on October 2, 1945. Just 4 words, "The buck stops here." The sign sat on Truman's desk in the Oval Office until the end of his presidency. "The buck stops here." What a great phrase. There may be no more succinct way to capture what I'm talking about. It takes no more than 3 seconds to resist the impulse to deflect blame. Then you can move from a whatever, not my problem attitude to an attitude that says, I'm sorry and I'll do whatever it takes. After all, taking ownership means you're no longer willing to pass the buck.
Chapter 5. It takes 3 seconds to walk the extra mile. Our brightest blazes are commonly kindled by unexpected sparks. Samuel Johnson.
Not long ago, my friend John Maxwell invited me to attend a conference put on by his company. Les, he told me, Catalyst is for young leaders, and I think you'd really enjoy it. Knowing my schedule was already jam-packed and sensing my hesitation to fly from Seattle to Atlanta for this weekend event, John added, I'm pretty sure you've never experienced a conference quite like this one, and I want you to be my guest. 5 days later, I was on a flight to Atlanta. John had one of his colleagues pick me up at the airport and whisk me straight to the arena where the conference was about to begin. When we got to our freeway exit, traffic was moving slowly. Are all these cars headed to the conference? I asked my driver. Yep, he said with a smile. Ahead of us, alongside the freeway ramp, I saw a dozen or more nicely dressed people carrying signs and waving at drivers. What are they doing? Before I could even finish my question, one young man positioned his makeshift sign so I could see it. I'll buy your tickets, it read. I said to my companion, what game do they want tickets for? He explained that Catalyst was a sold-out event and these people were hoping to buy unused tickets. You're kidding, I exclaimed. My driver just laughed and said, you've never been to this before, have you? When we turned into the massive parking lot, he took me to the main entrance of the arena and dropped me off. Kevin will be waiting for you inside, and he'll take you straight to John. As I stepped out onto the curb, I suddenly realized I was standing on a red carpet, the kind marked off by velvet ropes for celebrities. Cameras flashed on both sides of me. Strangers were cheering and asking me to pause for a photo. Just then, a huge bright yellow stretch limo Hummer pulled up to the curb, and about a dozen fellow conference attendees piled out to the same reception I was receiving. I finally figured out that this was happening for everyone who entered here. We walked along the carpet, some of us waving to the photographers and cheering spectators, others of us a bit bewildered. As we got closer to the doors, a uniformed band was playing loudly, and people greeted us with programs. That's when Kevin spotted me. Dr. Parrott, he said, John is waiting for you backstage. He ushered me through a few doors and took me straight to him. Hey, you made it, John exclaimed. Perfect timing. They've got seats for us right down front. I tried to ask John about what I'd experienced while entering the conference, but as we walked to the arena, it became too loud to talk. The place was nearly pitch black, except for a few isolated lights in the aisles and some colorful laser lights darting here and there. From head to toe, I could feel each beat of a thunderous bass drum as it boomed rhythmically through gargantuan speakers. It was compelling, and the conference hadn't even started. As the conference began, I was continually wowed by the unexpected. The first speaker actually brought a live cow on stage to illustrate a point. Later, to the sound of music from Mission Impossible, a few dozen ninjas descended from the rafters of the arena. On and on it went. I was simply amazed, and not at all what I expected from a leadership conference. That evening over dinner, John gave me the lowdown. We want to exceed everyone's expectations at this conference. That's why we staged ticket buyers and paparazzi. We wanted to make the seminar attendees, rather than the speakers, the stars. I'd say you succeeded, I said, still in awe. Success always follows when you exceed people's expectations, John said. Of course, John is absolutely right. Going above and beyond whatever is expected makes a lasting impression, and it's also a key ingredient to doing whatever it takes. What's the extra mile? Some years ago, a bunch of my frequent flyer miles were about to expire. Rather than let them go to waste, I planned a trip with my father to Rome, Italy. He'd been there many times, and I wanted him to give me the tour. In our 4 days there, we saw all the sights you might imagine, the Colosseum, the Sistine Chapel, the Trevi Fountain, and so on. One night during dinner at our hotel, the waiter was especially accommodating. Agreeing that he deserved a good tip, my dad and I began to talk about something I remember studying years earlier. Our setting was ideal because it had to do with the soldiers in the Roman Empire. Like soldiers today, they often carried heavy packs for great distances. Many of those soldiers, walking through a civilian area, would order a person to carry their pack for them. The practice was so common and so resented that a law was passed in the empire that required a young boy given this order to carry the soldier's backpack for a Roman mile, or about 1,000 paces, in either direction from his home. In those days, it was not unusual to see sticks in the ground along village lanes where boys had marked off the distances they would have to walk if a soldier requested it. Because this practice was so widespread in Jesus' time, he used it in his Sermon on the Mount as a means of teaching one of the most revolutionary relationship principles ever taught. None of his listeners liked being forced to carry anything any distance for a Roman soldier, but Jesus didn't preach that they should obey the law. Instead, he said that if they were ordered to carry a soldier's burden for a mile, then they should carry it 2 miles. This is where we get the phrase, the extra mile, and it all comes down to doing something above and beyond what's required. How to know when you've walked the extra mile. In life, most of us walk the first mile. We do what's required, what's expected. If you want to keep your job, stay married, and have friends, you have to walk the first mile. It's the minimum requirement. The extra mile, on the other hand, is the one nobody sees coming. It's a surprise. Now, before you think that what I'm saying is only accomplished on a grand scale, let me make this clear. We have the opportunity to walk the extra mile in big ways and little ways every day of our lives. Take, for example, an organization like the Four Seasons Hotel. If you ask any employee where to find a restroom, they won't point you down a hallway and tell you to turn right. No matter what they're doing, they'll stop, say right this way, and personally escort you to the restroom. Does a hotel have to do this for their patrons? Of course not. But if they want a reputation of exceeding expectations, they do. They will walk the extra mile, quite literally, again and again. It's not a natural impulse to walk more than the first mile. Our first impulse is to say, I've done what's required, and that's that. We check the task off our list and move on without a second thought, doing just enough to show we're doing our job or that we are a good person. But mastering this impulse has the power to revolutionize relationships, your career, and your life. 3 seconds can be all that stands between meeting the requirement and doing the extraordinary. After all, people who do whatever it takes rarely settle for satisfactory. They're interested in the unimaginable. The extra mile is never found on the path of least resistance. Google, the amazing search engine that tamed the vast resources of the internet, has drawn hordes of prospective employees to their doorstep. And in spite of their growing size, the company remains highly selective of job applicants. In fact, they are not even interested in reviewing an applicant if the person does not show initiative. So how does Google weed out the best from the rest? They take a different approach. In the summer of 2004, for example, Google placed billboard ads that simply read, open bracket, first 10-digit prime found in consecutive digits of E, close bracket, .com. Anyone able to solve that puzzle and find the website was directed to another website with another thorny math problem. Those smart enough to decipher that problem were taken to an internal Google page that praised their, quote, big magnificent brain, end quote, and invited them to apply for a job. Google assumed that if a person was motivated enough to solve a problem on a billboard and jump through their hoops, they were motivated enough to work for them. Not a bad strategy. By default, it eliminates those who are only seeking the path of least resistance. Someone once said, following the path of least resistance is what makes men and rivers crooked. We can seldom drift toward success. Instead, we find triumph not by drifting, but through intention. And that's exactly where you find the extra mile, on the intentional path. In other words, the extra mile requires initiative. It requires more than the minimum. Somewhere in my files from years ago, I found this list of ways to do just that. At the top, it says, do more than the minimum. I will do more than belong. I will participate. I will do more than care. I will help. I will do more than believe. I will practice. I will do more than be fair. I'll be kind. I'll do more than forgive. I will forget. I'll do more than dream. I will work. I will do more than teach. I will inspire. I will do more than earn. I will enrich. I will do more than give. I will serve. I will do more than live. I will grow. And finally, I will do more than suffer. I will triumph. The amazing power of the extra mile. The key to excelling in almost anything, whether it's marriage or management, athletics or academics, parenting or publicity, is to exceed expectations. Before we talk about a roadmap to walking the extra mile, here are 4 specific powers it contains. Number 1, the extra mile creates buzz. Everyone who has ever studied advertising knows that there's nothing better than buzz. This word-of-mouth chatter can spread like a virus. In the marketplace, it typically starts with what economists call price vigilantes. These are the people who sniff out good deals and feel compelled to tell everyone about them. The buzz they generate can create an epidemic, big or small. As Malcolm Gladwell in his book The Tipping Point documents, one satisfied customer can fill the empty tables of a new restaurant. A small band of kids in Soho can create a national resurgence in the sale of certain shoes. A few fanatics can dramatically increase the sales of a particular cell phone. It all comes down to buzz about something that exceeds expectations. Research has found that if a person gives a restaurant a rating of 5 on a scale of 1 to 5, they are 6 times more likely to tell friends about that restaurant. This same principle holds true on a personal level. If you exceed the expectations of friends, family, and colleagues, you create buzz. People can't help but talk about how you go the extra mile, and that talk will often get you farther and open up more doors for you than you can imagine. People who walk the extra mile can gain a legendary reputation in an organization or even in their neighborhood. We have a neighbor named Lucy in our Seattle neighborhood who is known for her parties. She hosts dozens of gatherings every year at her home, including parties that most people wouldn't even think of. Every Mother's Day, for example, she invites dozens of single moms to her home to celebrate them in style. Her Christmas parties are legendary, and no matter what the event, she does everything she can to make her guests feel welcome and enjoy themselves. We've seen her turn the simplest hamburger cookout into a fancy feast by providing unusual gourmet condiments. And if you're fortunate enough to get an invitation at New Year's, she will wow you with various food stations around her home that are sure to delight. Lucy personally creates buzz by exceeding expectations at every turn. Number 2, the extra mile can bring reward. In August of 2002, the letter from the editor at Newsweek was a posthumous tribute to someone I'd never heard of. Harry Quadracci, founder of Quad Graphics, the largest privately owned printing company in the world. Back in 1977, Harry was just the owner of a small printing press in Wisconsin, not usually a supplier to Newsweek, but he took an urgent order when they were unable to get work done by the regular printer. They rushed him the layouts, but the plane they were on was diverted to Chicago by a snowstorm. When Newsweek staff found out, they called Harry in a panic. But they were surprised to find that he had already sent a car to Chicago in the blizzard to retrieve the layouts, and they were by now on the press. Newsweek editor Mike Whitaker writes, "It was, as they say, the start of a beautiful friendship. We were so impressed by the quality and reliability of Harry's operation that we gave him all our Midwest business a year later." When Harry proactively challenged the snowstorm, he wasn't anticipating the tangible payoff it would bring. He was simply practicing a habit he had long before established, to resist the urge to do the mere minimum. For all he knew, as soon as the magazine's temporary problems with their regular printer were over, he might never hear from them again. But he went the extra mile anyway, and he enjoyed the reward. Number 3, the extra mile exerts influence. My friend Andrew recently told me that he handed a gas attendant a $20 bill for $10.10 worth of gas. Trying to simplify the change-making, the attendant asked, "Do you have 10 cents? "Yes, if you're short on change," Andrew responded, "but I really need change because there's a coffee machine at work that doesn't like most dollar bills." The attendant immediately handed Andrew 90 cents in coins. But then, before giving the rest of the change, he started sorting through his stack of dollar bills. He paused once, realizing he might be taking too long, and explained, "I'm looking for the ones your machine is most likely to take." Carefully, he handed over the cleanest, crispest bills he had found. "Maybe these will work." Now, there are 4 gas stations about equidistant from Andrew's home. Which one do you think he now uses? That's the power of walking the extra mile, even in small ways. How do you choose a gas station? How do you choose your closest confidants? Given the choice between someone who is pleasant and someone who is committed, who do you want to see again? That gas station attendant probably earned no more than minimum wage, so his efforts to serve especially impressed Andrew. The impulse to go the extra mile is ultimately unselfish, and people can sense that in you. By doing more than expected, you surprise, impress, and influence the actions of the people you come in contact with. Number 4, the extra mile is memorable. You always remember when someone exceeds your expectations. Andrew probably won't forget that gas station attendant. After reading about him, you might not either. Think about it. Can't you recall times when someone did something for you that was more than merely civil, something they didn't have to do? It may have been a total stranger who helped you find your way when you were lost. It may have been a sales clerk who tracked you down because she knew you were looking for a particular garment. It may have been a good Samaritan who called a tow truck and waited beside the road with you in your broken-down car. You get the idea. Extra mile moments create memories. They stick with you. Every time I visit a grocery store not far from my home, I remember the kindness of the manager who helped me out of a jam. On that day, I was scheduled to do a live interview on a radio talk show, but it had completely slipped my mind. Out on errands, I got a frantic call on my mobile phone from my publicist to tell me that the show was starting in 5 minutes. Needing a landline for the interview, I entered the store and approached the manager with my need. He paused for a brief moment, then ushered me behind a 2-way mirror looking into the store, into his personal office. "Here," he said, "you can close the door and nobody will bother you for the next hour. I'll put a sign up." A few seconds later, he brought in a bottle of water, saying, "Just in case your throat gets parched." Whoa, I wasn't asking him to give up his own office or bring me water, but he did. He certainly didn't need to do that. He exceeded my expectations when he asked for the favor, and I've never forgotten it. Great customer service and great relationships are built by continually exceeding expectations and creating memorable experiences. Signposts along the extra mile. The young boys in the ancient Roman Empire only marked off the first mile they had to travel with a soldier. To literally go the extra mile that Jesus taught in his sermon, they had to count paces and guess at how far that next mile was. Fortunately, we can see many extra mile signs if we know where to look. Each of them is marked with a positive surprise. Conviction. Have you ever met someone who sticks by their convictions no matter what? Who is willing to pay any price, even losing a job or a friend, to do what they believe is the right thing? You may not have thought of this as a way of walking the extra mile, but I believe it is. Dennis Waitley wrote about a rookie nurse's first day on the surgical team of a large, well-known hospital. In the operating room, one of her responsibilities was ensuring that all instruments and materials were accounted for at the end of the surgery. During her first surgery, as the surgeon prepared to close the incision, she said to him, "You've only removed 11 sponges. We used 12 sponges, and we need to find the last one." "I removed them all," the doctor declared emphatically. "We'll close the incision now." "No," the rookie nurse objected. "We used 12 sponges." "I'll take the responsibility," the surgeon said grimly. "Suture." "You can't do that, sir," blazed the nurse. "Think of the patient." The surgeon smiled, lifted his foot, showed the nurse the 12th sponge. "You'll do just fine in this or any other hospital." Whenever you stand your ground out of conviction, not because you're just flexing your muscles, but because you're looking out for someone else's welfare, you are walking the extra mile. The surgeon was looking for that impulse in the nurse, and he was pleased to find it. She was concerned about the patient's health, but we all have convictions for everything from justice to personal safety. By standing up for what you believe, you have the opportunity to create a positive surprise for those around you. Another signpost along the extra mile is looking past the negative. He was always in trouble at school, so when the parents of the junior high boy received one more call to come in and meet with his teacher and the principal, they knew what was coming, or so they thought. The teacher sat down with the boy's father and said, "Thanks for coming. I wanted you to hear what I have to say." The father crossed his arms and waited, expecting the worst. He was surprised when the teacher proceeded to list 10 positive attributes of his junior high troublemaker. When she finished, the father said, "And what else? Let's hear the bad things." "That's all I wanted to say," she said. That night, when the father got home, he repeated the conversation to his son, and something changed. Almost overnight, the troublemaker's attitude and behavior started to improve. This dramatic transformation started because a teacher looked past the negatives. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is just one of those little inspirational anecdotes that never really happened. You're thinking it's the kind of story that writers and speakers use to inspire. Well, you're right. I'm trying to inspire you. But it also happens to be true. As a psychologist, I see this scenario played out over and over with bullies and troublemakers of all ages. When dealing with a difficult child, very few people are willing to look past the negative. And it doesn't take long for the child to begin to live up, or should I say down, to everyone's negative expectations. But what a surprise when the focus is put on the positive. When you focus on the positive in a relationship, you not only benefit yourself by improving your own attitude, you also influence the other person. By taking 3 seconds to reject the impulse toward negative expectations, you set yourself and others up for positive outcomes. What a powerful way to walk the extra mile. Another signpost you'll see is flexibility. How many times have you encountered an unyielding, inflexible person who seems incapable of empathy with others? It's infuriating, isn't it? My friend Sandy recently returned from a trip to Egypt. In her preparation, she had purchased some new luggage, but soon into her trip, she realized that one of the new suitcases had a zipper that would not stay closed. She ended up repacking as much as she could and finding ways to creatively close the suitcase. Obviously, the bag had not served her well, so after getting home, she tried to return the bag to the store for a refund. Reasonable request, don't you think? Well, not to the salesperson. On hearing her request, she didn't even look up from her paperwork. She said, "You traveled with it, so you can't return it." Sandy figured he needed clarification, so she explained she was already traveling when she discovered that the bag was virtually useless. Yes, she'd traveled with it, but it had gone along on the trip as a passenger, not as a contributing member of the party. But the explanation didn't sway the store's employee. He made it clear that he was sticking to the store's policy and refused to let her return the bag. Sandy walked out of the store with her broken suitcase, not a refund, and she doesn't ever plan to go back. The salesman's inflexibility lost the store a loyal customer. I think everyone's first impulse is to do only what's required. This salesman was not alone in his insistence on obeying the set policy. I'm just doing my job. It's all that's needed to defend the position. When you face an obstacle in your attempts to meet a need, you can see it as a signpost for the opportunity to go the extra mile. Generosity is another sign. French philosopher Albert Camus said, "Too many have dispensed with generosity in order to practice charity." I believe that the two are at least a mile apart in focus. Charity is first-mile behavior. It's counterfeit generosity, doing only the bare minimum. Charity gives the giver a tax break. Generosity is based on genuine empathy and intention. It goes beyond expectations. By all accounts, Macklin Schulis should have been on the receiving end of generosity. Critically ill with a brain tumor, he was approached by the Make-A-Wish Foundation, which has been granting wishes of children with life-threatening illnesses since 1980. Most children choose to meet a favorite celebrity or a sports figure or take a family trip to Walt Disney World. But Macklin's wish was to enrich the lives of others. He asked the Make-A-Wish Foundation to build something that he might never get to enjoy, a rock-climbing wall on the playground of Ellisville Elementary School in Missouri. Too weak to even visit the project, Mac died 2 days after it was completed on April 9, 2004. Dave Ness, principal at the 600-student school in suburban Ellisville, said, "We learned a lesson from a 9-year-old that even when we're going through tough times, we should be thinking of other people, not ourselves." Talk about walking the extra mile. That's a lesson most grown-ups haven't quite learned. Generosity gives you everything. Why? Because when you walk the extra mile with generosity, you give your all. Yet you always feel as if it cost you nothing. Another signpost is honesty. Most of us don't consider a commitment to honesty a feature of the second mile. After all, decent human beings are inherently honest, right? Maybe not. Good people can do some shady things. Even a well-intentioned salesperson can be tempted to capitalize on the customer's ignorance by telling only the good aspects of the product. A husband can give one reason why he didn't do something that she'd asked. He forgot, and neglect to tell the other reason. It wasn't really important to him. A customer who discovers she wasn't charged for an item might set it aside with plans to return it, but never actually gets around to it. Scrupulous honesty requires second-mile thinking because it's hard. It's inconvenient. It can even lead to conflict. It can lose a sale, but it can also engender complete trust. Richard Wetherill, a management consultant for over 6 decades until his death in 1989, came up with a theory that had only limited appeal at the time, the right action ethic. He proposed that there was a natural law of absolute right, and right action would get right results, whereas wrong action would beget wrong results. Kind of sounds like something Jesus would preach, doesn't it? But in business, moral absolutes often fall to relativism. If goals are met, then any methods used to achieve them are justified. Wetherall had a small but loyal following, and in 1978, near the end of his life, a group of his research associates formed a company with the goal of applying and demonstrating the success of his theories. This company, Wetherall Associates Incorporated, sells alternator and starter products for automobiles worldwide. Starting as a telephone sales company, it began carrying its own inventory in the early 1980s. By the late 1990s, they had annual sales of $160 million and were growing at a rate of 25% per year. TheGoodSteward.com is a website that provides information and tools to help people practice biblical stewardship with their money. In 1997, Carter LaCroix, a financial planner and contributor to the site, wrote this about the company. These performance figures are especially impressive given that Wetherall has no sales or profit goals. In fact, the company manual specifically states, "We do not try to make profits or avoid losses. Instead, we try to take right action in the best way that we know. The profits are a natural byproduct." Wetherall Associates' success has surprised many. By going the extra mile with their honesty and integrity, they have shown that Richard Wetherall knew what he was talking about. Their right results paint the picture. Well, another sign along the extra mile is humility. Steve Sample is the president of the University of Southern California. In his book, The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership, Sample shares a leadership lesson he learned near the beginning of his career. He says that one of his earliest introductions to real leadership occurred in 1971 when he was named, at the tender age of 30, to be the Deputy Director for Academic Affairs of the Illinois Board of Higher Education. It was in this position that he learned a great deal from the board's chairman, George Clements, who had made a name for himself as the man who built the Chicago-based Jewel Tea Company into a major national grocery chain. Sample writes, "When I first arrived at my post, Mr. Clements said, 'Steve, let me give you some basic advice about leadership. You should spend a small amount of your time hiring your direct reports, evaluating them, exhorting them, setting their compensation, praising them, kicking their butts, and when necessary, firing them. When you add all that up, it should come out to about 10% of your time. For the remaining 90% of your time, you should be doing everything you can to help your direct reports succeed. You should be the first assistant to the people who work for you.'" Of course, the advice Steve Sample received from Mr. Clements is not what most new leaders want to hear. After working so hard to achieve their success, most of us are ready to let others begin serving us, not the other way around. Humility like this is surprising, and you don't have to be an organizational leader to practice it. Everyone can walk the extra mile with humility. The final sign I want to note is humor. When President Ronald Reagan, then 70, was shot by John Hinckley Jr., it was a very dark day in U.S. history. Reagan took a bullet and was rushed to the hospital. As he was wheeled into the emergency room at George Washington University Hospital, he looked up at the doctors and nurses and said, "I hope you're all Republicans." And the first words he uttered upon regaining consciousness to the nurse who happened to be holding the president's hand were, "Does Nancy know about us?" When Nancy herself arrived a few minutes later, Reagan greeted her with the comment, "Honey, I forgot to duck." He was quoting prizefighter Jack Dempsey, who had said the same thing to his own wife after losing the heavyweight championship to rival Gene Tunney in 1926. And according to Edwin Meese, Reagan's attorney general, the president stumped him and other members of the White House staff with the greeting, "Who's minding the store?" One reporter has said that Reagan's humor made it hard not to like him, no matter what your political leanings. And it's true, humor has a way of putting people at ease, especially when you're not expecting it. That's what can make humor an extra mile practice. In tough times, it diffuses tension. As Grenville Kleiser said, good humor is a tonic for mind and body. It is the best antidote for anxiety and depression. It is a business asset. It attracts and keeps friends. It lightens human burdens. It's easy to be earnest and serious, and it's often necessary. Even though Reagan joked with the surgeon, I'm sure he was glad the doctor was serious about his work. And that's the way to go the second mile with humor. Take the task seriously, but not yourself. It takes 3 seconds to walk the extra mile. Okay, not really. Actually, walking the extra mile will probably take more than 3 seconds. But by just pausing for 3 seconds, we can challenge the impulse to go only the first mile and choose instead to exceed expectations. Author and motivational speaker Gary Ryan Blair said it well. Do more than is required. What is the distance between someone who achieves their goals consistently and those who spend their lives and careers merely following? The extra mile.
You're listening to 3 Seconds by Dr. Les Parrott. This concludes this disc. Please proceed to Disc 4 for the continuation of the program.